The JonBenét Ramsey case has intrigued the world for over 25 years. But now, with the use of new DNA technology, experts believe we are closer than ever to uncovering the truth. Will science finally solve this mystery? If you want to closely follow the latest developments in this case and other intriguing mysteries, subscribe to the channel now and activate the notification bell. Here, every video is a fundamental piece in the quest for the truth. You've heard of many technological advancements over the years, but imagine this. A case that shook the entire world in 1996 and that, for decades, seemed impossible to solve, may finally have answers thanks to science. Yes, we're talking about the JonBenét Ramsey case. A girl of only 6 years old, found lifeless in her own basement on a night that was supposed to be full of Christmas magic. For 27 years, the world watched theories, speculations, suspicions, and even documentaries promising the truth, but none managed to bring justice. And now, a small advancement in DNA could be the breakthrough everyone was waiting for. The most intriguing part is that the very technology that could solve the case was already partially available since 1997. The DNA found at the crime scene was analyzed at the time, but science wasn't advanced enough to fully separate the samples. And even with the limited tools of that era, the discovery of an unidentified male DNA caused a stir. The questions were inevitable. Who was that person? What was their role in the crime? However, science stopped there, as if it had hit an insurmountable wall. But today, the story's different. Advances like genetic genealogy and the ability to separate mixed DNA, something that was impossible at the time, have given investigators hope. Cold cases from decades ago have been solved in the blink of an eye with this new approach. And in the JonBenét case, where so many clues left more doubts than answers, this technology can finally do what seemed impossible. Give a name to the DNA found at the crime scene. The big question everyone is asking is there still time for this? Get ready, because what we're going to analyze today goes far beyond superficial news. We will look into the details of how science is revolutionizing criminal investigations and why this advancement might be exactly what the JonBenét Ramsey case needs to be solved. It's hard to believe, but the truth is that often the answers to the biggest mysteries are right in front of us, just waiting for the right technology to be found. What is most surprising about the JonBenét Ramsey case is that the male DNA found at the crime scene has been there since 1997. But what most people don't know is that this technology was far from accurate at that time. At the crime scene, investigators found DNA samples on JonBenét's pajamas that did not match either of her parents or other people present in the house. This seemed like a decisive clue, but there was a problem. The genetic material was mixed. It was like trying to separate two different colored strands of hair woven together. The science of the 90s simply couldn't reliably separate the samples. Therefore, for decades, the case remained stagnant. Now, with genetic genealogy, everything has changed. This technology has already been used to solve cases like the Golden State Killer, a serial killer who remained at large for decades until his DNA was traced to distant relatives. This was only possible because we can now not only identify an individual, but also map their family tree. Imagine this being applied to the JonBenét case. The DNA sample that was once useless can now lead directly to a suspect or even a name. But what really surprises is how this technology can completely change what we know about the case. What if the culprit was never anyone the investigators even considered? What if the DNA shows a connection no one imagined? These advances are challenging everything we thought we knew about criminal investigations, and the JonBenét case might be next to reveal a completely unexpected outcome. However, there is a problem that needs to be addressed. If this technology is available, why wasn't it used before? The answer is as frustrating as it is sad: human failures. From the beginning, the JonBenét Ramsey case was marked by a series of mistakes that compromised the investigation. The local police, inexperienced with high-profile cases, allowed various pieces of evidence to be contaminated. The Ramsey family home became chaotic, with people coming and going before the location was secured. As a result, many clues were lost forever. Even when the DNA was found, the reluctance to share information and collaborate between departments further delayed progress. For years, the investigation was treated as a dispute between the local police and private investigators hired by the family. Over time, the case became more about the media's wild theories than about justice for JonBenét. What remains to be seen is there enough DNA to be reanalyzed? After all, decades have passed, and inadequate storage might have compromised the integrity of the samples. Additionally, have past errors hampered the investigation so much that even cutting-edge science won't be able to bring clear answers? Despite all this, the possibility that technology could solve the case is exciting, not only because it can bring justice to JonBenét, but also because it represents hope for so many families whose cases remain unanswered. While we await the next steps, one thing is certain: the world will be watching closely, hoping that this time, the mystery comes to an end. Looking at what we already know so far, it's clear that the JonBenét Ramsey case was never just about finding the culprit. It's also about confronting decades of assumptions, contradictory theories, and failures that push the case into almost mythical territory. But now what this new DNA technology promises to do is not only revolutionize criminal investigations in general, it can dismantle everything we believed we knew about that night in 1996. Think about it. For years, the narrative revolved around the seemingly confusing crime scene. Authorities initially stated that there were no signs of a break-in at the Ramsey family home, which immediately put parents John and Patsy Ramsey under suspicion. But what if the DNA collected that night completely contradicts this idea? What if this technology can prove that someone from outside was actually there? The possibility of obtaining a genetic match would not only reinforce this theory, but also invalidate years of speculation that turned JonBenét's parents into targets of public opinion. However, this is where things start to get even more complicated. The male DNA found in 1997 was only part of the story. Other physical evidence, such as marks on the victim's body and the rope used, were widely debated, but never directly correlated to a suspect. And although the police listed hundreds of potential individuals involved, many were dismissed due to lack of concrete connection. With the new technology, there is hope that DNA fragments can not only identify the owner, but also provide clues about where they were before or after the crime. But do you see the irony? This technology, which could solve the case, is only being seriously considered now, 27 years later. Why did it take so long to modernize evidence analysis? Part of it is due to what many call institutional pride, authorities' reluctance to admit past mistakes or seek external help. It's a story as old as justice itself, protecting the reputation of an institution above all else. Furthermore, the fact that the crime scene was so poorly managed at the time is an obstacle that no one can ignore. Witnesses freely walked around the house, objects were handled without any care, and worse yet, there was a total lack of isolation of the main area. With these inconsistencies, any evidence collected that night, including the DNA, could have been compromised. This leaves us with an essential question. What if the new analyses confirm that the DNA belongs to someone completely off the radar? How will the police justify decades of investigation focused almost exclusively on the Ramsey family? Here's something no one discusses. Even if this technology gives us a name, there is a long road to connect that name to the events of that night. DNA, after all, but cannot answer broader questions like motive or the exact sequence of events. What can complicate things further is the fact that, over the years, those directly involved in the case, including key witnesses, have changed their stories or refused to cooperate. And speaking of changing stories, there is a crucial point that most people forget. In 2008, the Boulder District Attorney formally cleared JonBenét's parents based on DNA analyses, stating that neither was genetically linked to the evidence. This was a relief for the family, but also raised another question. If it wasn't them, who was? The absence of a clear suspect only fueled the narrative that the true culprit might have escaped while the police pursued wrong leads. With this, the introduction of genetic genealogy into the case opens doors that once seemed locked forever. Imagine the possibility of tracing DNA to distant relatives, cross-referencing data with genetic databases, and finally identifying a suspect no one ever considered. This advancement not only offers hope, but also forces a revisit of every detail of the initial investigation. And that's where everything can change. However, technology alone cannot rewrite history. It needs action, transparency, and above all, the willingness to correct past mistakes. Because in the end, what's at stake here is not just solving a case, but also the public's trust in a system that has failed so many times. If the new DNA analysis can unravel this mystery, it will not only be a victory for science, but also for JonBenét's memory, which has been waiting for justice for so long. Looking at everything that has been said about the JonBenét Ramsey case, it seems that every theory, every fragment of evidence, every testimony left more questions than answers. But this is where things begin to change. The DNA technology we're discussing is not just a modern tool, it's a key, perhaps the last one, to unlocking the truths hidden in a case that has sparked debates for nearly 3 decades. Let's start with the DNA found in 1997. At the time, investigators identified a trace of male genetic material on JonBenét's clothing. This was considered a significant discovery, something that could direct the investigation. But there was a problem. The technology of the time couldn't accurately separate mixed samples. This meant that the male DNA was contaminated with other genetic traces, possibly from the victim herself, or even from other people who handled the evidence. This led to numerous theories about the culprit, but no concrete proof. Now imagine this with today's technology. Advanced tools not only can separate mixed samples, but also perform a complete kinship mapping, connecting DNA to possible relatives. This means that even if the original suspect isn't in a database, it's possible to find relatives who can point the way. This approach has already been used to solve cold cases from decades ago, like the Golden State Killer, where DNA connected him to the crime through distant relatives. But what does this really mean for the JonBenét case? Well, there are 2 major implications. First, if the DNA can be isolated and linked to a suspect, it can finally give the police a clear direction, something that has been missing since the beginning. Second, it can also challenge old theories, including those that accuse the Ramsey family themselves. Remember, for years, John and Patsy Ramsey were the main suspects, largely due to the narrative built by the media and public opinion. If the DNA belongs to someone outside the family circle, it can confirm that they were victims of a system that failed them. However, there's another side to this story. Even with technological advances, there are significant challenges in dealing with such old evidence. The samples may have degraded, especially considering the inadequate handling of the crime scene in 1996. Witnesses and involved parties, including the family, police, and close friends, had free access to the house before it was properly secured. This negligence could have introduced contaminants, making it difficult to identify a clear line between what is relevant and what is noise. Additionally, there's something many don't consider. What if the DNA found isn't even linked to the true culprit? What if it's from someone who tampered with the crime scene afterward, or someone who wasn't directly involved in the murder? This could lead to new theories, but also further complicate the investigation. Imagine the impact of this on a case already wrapped in layers of speculation. And of course, there are alternative theories. One of them, which many believe to be plausible, is that the murderer could have been someone who knew the family. Someone with access to the house and knowledge of the Ramsey strength with the fact that the house was large and complicated to navigate, something a stranger would have difficulty doing without being noticed. If this is the case, the DNA could belong to someone who was there regularly, but not necessarily involved in the crime. Another theory gaining attention is the possibility that the crime was committed by an intruder, someone who entered with the specific intent to kidnap or harm JonBenét. The ransom note found in the house is often used to support this idea, but the handwriting and content of the note have also raised doubts. Was it really a ransom request or an attempt to cover something else? Now consider this. With advancements in DNA analysis, it's possible not only to identify the owner of the genetic material, but also to obtain information about their ancestry, physical characteristics, and even health conditions. This means that even if the exact identity of the culprit isn't immediately revealed, the profile that can be built based on the DNA can be sufficient to direct investigations more effectively than ever before. But like any technology, there are limits. DNA analysis cannot provide answers about motives, contexts, or details of the sequence of events. For that, traditional investigation is still necessary, connecting the dots and gathering complementary evidence. This is where the collaboration between technology and human investigation becomes crucial. What this leads us to conclude is that, although the new technology represents a monumental step, it is not a magical solution. But there is something undeniably powerful about the idea that, after so much time, there is a real chance to solve one of the most emblematic cases in history. And if this happens, it will not just be a victory for science, but a milestone in the pursuit of justice. Because in the end, what's at stake is not just finding the culprit, but also bringing a sense of closure to a story that has haunted so many people for so long. The advancement of DNA technology in the JonBenét Ramsey case has brought a surprising revelation that can change everything we thought about this investigation. When the DNA was originally collected in 1997, the available methods were limited. They indicated the presence of male genetic material mixed with JonBenét's blood, but at the time, this wasn't enough for a clear identification. Today, however, these limitations no longer exist. Science has advanced to the point of accurately separating these mixtures and even tracing genetic connections, even if the suspect never had their DNA recorded in a criminal database. But what does this exactly mean for the case? Think about this. A DNA fragment, forgotten in an archive for over 2 decades, now has the potential to tell a story that no one expected to hear. We're not just talking about finding the culprit, but also about reviewing everything that was said about that night. For example, the theories that put the Ramsey family under suspicion could be completely overturned if the DNA points to someone outside the family circle. And this raises an important question. What if we've been looking at the wrong suspect from the beginning? And here's the most disturbing part. One of the major problems in the case was the initial handling of the evidence. The crime scene was compromised, with friends and family walking around the house before the police could secure it. This means that the DNA found may not necessarily belong to the culprit. It could be from anyone who was in that house that day, or even before that. It's a detail that can change everything. Imagine if the findings point to someone unexpected, like a family friend, a neighbor, or even a complete stranger. Then comes the question, why did it take so long to do this? If this technology has existed for some years, what prevented investigators from using it earlier? This leads us to an even darker point. Was there a lack of interest in truly solving this case? Some people believe that the stigma surrounding the Ramsey family diverted the focus of the investigation for years, leaving other essential clues aside. But the impact of this new analysis goes beyond finding the culprit. It can reveal flaws in the investigative system itself. After all, how did one of the world's most well-known cases remain unsolved for so long, even with available evidence? This exposes a larger problem that goes beyond JonBenét. How many other cases are stalled, waiting for the same technology? How many families are still living without answers? And what if the DNA doesn't point to anyone? That possibility also exists, and it would be a disturbing twist because it would mean that the genetic evidence, which has always been seen as the key to the mystery, might never be examined other evidence, such as the ransom note, the parents' statements, and even the circumstances surrounding JonBenét's death. This discovery is not just about science. It's about rewriting a narrative that the entire world isn't the name of the culprit, but the uncomfortable truths that have been ignored over all these years. If this technology is truly used to its fullest, it can not only solve the JonBenét case, but also completely change the way we understand criminal investigations going forward. With each new advancement, we move closer not only to answers, but also to a new perspective on what really happened that December night. The question remains, are we ready for the truth? Advances in DNA technology bring us closer to answers than ever before, but also expose the failures that left this case unsolved for so long. The lingering question is, are we ready for what this technology can reveal? Personally, I believe that this new analysis can not only bring justice to JonBenét, but also completely change the course of criminal investigations worldwide. Science finally has the power to unravel decades of mystery. And if you've made it this far, tell me in the comments. I am Team Justice. I want to know who is with me in this quest for answers. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. In the next content, we will talk about another case that took a surprising turn with new evidence. You won't want to miss it.